She's just a farm girl who got lucky in basic training," the intelligence officer muttered when Captain Elena Vasquez volunteered for the reconnaissance mission. 4 days later, when enemy forces had surrounded the entire battalion and conventional tactics had failed, that same officer was desperately hoping the farm girl's knowledge of the terrain could lead 300 soldiers safely home through paths that didn't exist on any military map. Captain Elena Vasquez stood at the edge of forward operating base Copper, watching the sun rise over the valleys of eastern Afghanistan. At 31, she carried herself with the steady presence of someone who had learned patience long before she ever wore a uniform. Her dark eyes constantly scanned the horizon, reading the landscape the way others read books. The other officer saw a competent logistics coordinator who had somehow earned her commission through State University, ROTC. They had no idea that she'd grown up on her family's 1,000-acre farm in rural New Mexico, where survival meant understanding every rock, every water source, and every animal trail across miles of unforgiving terrain. Elena had been deployed to Afghanistan for 8 months, managing supply routes and coordinating with local farmers about crop protection programs. Her superiors valued her ability to communicate with rural communities, but they'd never considered that her agricultural background gave her insights that West Point graduates couldn't match. If you want to hear more stories about veterans who found strength in unexpected places, make sure to subscribe. These are the stories of ordinary people who became extraordinary when their country needed them most. Elena's family had worked the same land in New Mexico for 4 generations. Her grandmother, Maria Vasquez, had taught her to read the high desert the way ancient peoples had done for centuries. Maria showed her how to find water by watching bird flight patterns, how to predict weather changes days in advance by observing cloud formations, and how to move across rough terrain without leaving tracks. When drought threatened the family farm during Elena's teenage years, she'd spent entire summers walking fence lines that stretched for miles, checking cattle in remote canyons and arroyos that required hours of hiking to reach. She learned every game trail, every seasonal stream, every hidden valley where cattle could find shelter during storms. The Army had given Elena formal training in map reading and navigation, but her real education had come from a childhood spent following her grandmother across landscapes that demanded respect. Maria had survived the Depression by knowing exactly where to find food and water when conventional sources failed. She'd passed that knowledge to Elena, along with an understanding that the land always reveals its secrets to those patient enough to listen. Elena's motivation for military service ran deeper than patriotism. She'd watched her older brother struggle with unemployment after his factory closed, and she'd seen how military service could provide stability and purpose for rural families. The Army offered her a chance to serve while using skills that most people didn't even recognize as valuable. The trouble started when Major Douglas Keller arrived at Phobe Copper with new orders from division headquarters. Intelligence reports indicated increased Taliban activity in the surrounding valleys, and Keller had been sent to implement a more aggressive patrol strategy. He took one look at Elena's agricultural liaison duties and decided she was being wasted on what he called farmer politics. During the morning briefing, Keller announced that all officers would rotate through combat patrol assignments to gain field experience. When Elena suggested alternative routes that avoided known trouble spots, Keller dismissed her input as overly cautious. He'd studied the same satellite imagery and topographical maps that everyone else used, and he couldn't understand why Elena kept talking about seasonal water sources and animal migration patterns. The Major's plan called for larger patrol units, moving along established roads and valley floors where vehicles could provide support. Elena tried to explain that local farmers had told her about increased hostile activity in those exact areas, but Keller interpreted her concerns as reluctance to engage in real military operations. Other officers supported Keller's approach because it followed conventional doctrine they'd learned in Staff College. Elena's suggestions about using livestock trails and seasonal routes sounded like guesswork to people who trusted GPS coordinates and official maps. The disconnect between her field knowledge and their textbook training created a growing tension that nobody wanted to address directly. That evening, Elena walked the perimeter of the base, her mind churning with frustration and growing concern. She could feel something building in the surrounding mountains, the same way she'd sensed approaching storms on the family ranch. Local farmers had stopped bringing their concerns to the base, and the usual patterns of daily life in nearby villages had subtly shifted. She thought about her grandmother Maria, who had taught her that the land speaks to those willing to listen. The mountains around FOB Copper were trying to tell him something important, but the military leadership was too focused on satellite imagery and digital intelligence to pay attention to older forms of knowledge. Elena's concern wasn't personal pride or career advancement. She'd spent months building relationships with local farmers, learning about seasonal patterns and traditional routes that had been used for centuries. The Taliban weren't using random hideouts. They were following paths that connected hidden valleys and provided natural concealment. Elena could see the pattern forming, but she couldn't make anyone else understand its significance. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like the heavy pack she'd carried across New Mexico canyons as a teenager. If Keller's aggressive patrol strategy went forward without proper reconnaissance, soldiers were going to walk into carefully prepared ambushes. 3 days later, Major Keller's first patrol disappeared completely. Radio contact was lost when Staff Sergeant Morrison's squad entered the Ghazni Valley, following the main road exactly as planned. Search and rescue teams found abandoned vehicles and equipment, but no trace of the 12 soldiers who had been manning the patrol. Intelligence analysts pored over satellite feeds and drone footage, searching for clues about what had happened. Meanwhile, 2 more patrols reported unusual activity and possible hostile contact before their communications went silent. Within 48 hours, Keller had lost contact with nearly 50 soldiers spread across 3 different valleys. Elena studied the locations where contact had been lost and immediately recognized the pattern. Each patrol had followed standard routes that intersected with traditional herding paths during seasonal migration periods. The Taliban had been watching these movements for weeks, learning American patrol schedules and setting up coordinated ambush positions. Division headquarters ordered FOB Copper to prepare for a full-scale rescue operation involving the entire battalion. The plan called for mechanized infantry units to sweep through all 3 valleys simultaneously, using overwhelming firepower to locate and extract the missing soldiers. Elena realized that this conventional approach would lead the entire battalion into the same trap that had already claimed 50 men. When she requested permission to propose an alternative strategy, Major Keller told her that combat operations were beyond her area of expertise. The rescue mission was scheduled to begin at dawn. At 0400 hours, Elena made a decision that would have ended her military career under normal circumstances. Instead of waiting for official approval, she slipped out of the base and began moving toward the high ground her grandmother had taught her to seek during times of danger. Using livestock trails and seasonal water routes that didn't appear on any military map, she worked her way into the mountains above the Ghazni Valley. Her childhood training in the New Mexico wilderness had prepared her for exactly this kind of movement. Invisible progress across terrain that would challenge mountain goats. From her concealed position on the eastern ridge, Elena could see what satellite imagery had missed. The missing patrols were being held in a complex of natural caves and abandoned mining tunnels that connected 3 separate valleys. Taliban forces had created an elaborate network of positions that could only be spotted from specific vantage points at certain times of day. Elena's radio crackled to life just as the battalion began its rescue operation. Major Keller's voice was tense as he reported that lead elements were taking heavy fire from unknown positions. The conventional sweep was walking into the same coordinated ambush that had trapped the original patrols, using her position and terrain knowledge. Elena began calling out precise coordinates for Taliban positions that weren't visible from the valley floor. Her voice was calm and professional as she guided artillery strikes onto targets that division intelligence had never identified. Within 20 minutes, she had neutralized the entire enemy network using nothing but her ability to see the battlefield. The way her grandmother had taught her to read the high desert, the rescue operation succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. All 50 missing soldiers were recovered alive, and the Taliban network that had threatened the entire region was eliminated, without a single additional American casualty. Elena's improvised reconnaissance had turned a potential disaster into a tactical victory that would be studied at staff colleges for years to come. Major Keller found Elena cleaning her equipment after the mission, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine respect. He admitted that his conventional training had blinded him to capabilities that didn't fit standard categories. Elena's agricultural background and terrain knowledge had provided intelligence that million-dollar surveillance systems had missed completely. Division headquarters requested a full debriefing about Elena's tactics and recommended her for immediate promotion to major. More importantly, they began incorporating local knowledge and traditional navigation techniques into their standard operating procedures. Elena's success had proven that sometimes the most valuable military assets come from unexpected backgrounds. 6 months later, Major Elena Vasquez was leading a new program that trained military personnel to work with local communities and traditional knowledge systems. She often thought about her grandmother Maria, who had taught her that the greatest victories come not from forcing the land to submit, but from learning to work with it. In the mountains of Afghanistan, that ancient wisdom had saved 300 American lives and honored a family legacy that stretched back through generations of strong women who knew how to find their way home.